So, Chiney, looking back at the entire series, what was the biggest reason, do you think, for the Jazz blowing what was a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets?
Well, I'd have to say that, it's easy to sort of want to play the blame game because it's a game 7 and everyone really cares. But to me, there's no one to blame because we got game 7. And it wasn't just a game 7 in which we thought, oh, like these guys are dropping 50 and 40 and it's going to be out of parallel in the score category. It was 80-78. We got old school basketball. You can't blame Donovan Mitchell because obviously I think, if Jamal Murray is the breakout star of the bubble, Donovan Mitchell is the guy who now has cemented his status. Like, we all knew he had potential. Now we're seeing that potential be actualized. He still had, 22 points or so and shot pretty efficiently over the course of the series. Rudy Gobert, what did he have? 19 and 18? They gave their all. And you saw down the stretch how amazing it was to, the narrative going into this series was what was the relationship like between Donovan and Rudy? And then you see these guys literally have love for each other as they're competing. Gobert's dunk was great. Donovan finishing plays late, even though the last one was sort of out of his hand. I think it was beautiful to see what the narrative was when the pandemic started and where these two teammates are. So I'm not going to put any blame on any one of them, even though, they ended up losing.
Rachel, this is going to be something that haunts the Jazz for the next 4 or 5 months whenever they play again. Look, there's been, I think, 12 teams that have blown 3-1 leads over the course of the last 50 or so years in the NBA, and almost all of them have had to make changes, and that's because it's so traumatic. And I don't think that's necessarily in the cards for the Jazz. But while Chiney is right that there isn't one finger to point, I mean, Donovan Mitchell, as great as he was, had that 8-second violation in Game 1. If that didn't happen, they might have swept this series. Obviously, the turnover last night, but you can't blame him. I think, if anything, they decided to make some changes to this team that reduced their defense and boosted their offense. And the reason they struggled, not last night, but in the 3 losses leading up to it, was because their defense wasn't good enough. So I think they'll look to improve that. But this is going to be a tough one. They're going to be thinking about this for a long time.
But, Brian, isn't the biggest change they can make to get Bogdanovich back from injury?
Yeah, for sure. And that's got to be the asterisk on the whole thing, is that they didn't have their full team. And maybe if they did, they would have won. But I'm just telling you, having been around teams that lost 3-1 leads, there's scar tissue that's going to come out of this. We'll definitely see that.
All right, well, waiting in the wings for the Nuggets is indeed the Clippers, who last played on Saturday. Here's Jamal's reaction to Scott Van Pelt when telling him when the series starts. This was amazing. Take a listen.
Both look gassed, both sides. And the Clippers, we know, is going to be a rugged test. Between now and Thursday, what do you do?
We play Thursday?
You
don't get 2 days off?
No. No, it's Thursday.
Man,
Chiney, I don't know if you've been there before. Just that, wait, what? Will the fatigue, do you think, be too much a factor for the Nuggets to overcome in Game 1?
I mean, that's the problem. Fatigue is sort of out of your control. You literally work to put yourself in a position where you can go and play the Clippers, in a Game 7, but then that's closer than you even thought. And it's funny because it takes me back to my days when playing, where you don't focus on the next game until you finish that game in itself. And when the game was finished, you don't even know what your calendar is looking like. You think that naturally, outside of the bubble, you have a couple of days, you're changing cities. No, in the bubble, we're playing in 48 hours. And the Clippers haven't played since Sunday, so they are going to be rested. But one thing I think that can work to the Nuggets' favor is the fact that now Jamal Murray is looked to as an explosive scorer. Like, he will have confidence going in there. So even if they are tired, he will still know how to push through that. Gary Harris, I loved his defense. He's a defender that will take the challenge of going up against Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and the company. And then also Jokic, I mean, quietly with the 30 and 14, he was like Old Faithful. Just very rock steady. So even though they may be tired, they did find a perfect combination of players that all were very important in getting them to the position of advancing in the next round.
We see this almost every year where a higher seed team waits and there's sometimes an advantage. The one thing I'll say is if this was a normal year, the Nuggets would be flying to L.A. today. They would have won at home last night in Game 7, and they would have had a 2.5-hour flight. So they don't have to travel. So at least that's on their side. But, Rachel, if you watched this game last night, both of these teams were low on energy. So I would say huge advantage Clippers Game 1. In fact, if you're Doc Rivers, you're showing your team that clip that you just showed from the SVP show to get them going leading into that game.
Yeah, a bunch of short shots in the fourth quarter, which is, of course, as we know, a sign of exhaustion. And look, you said the point about they'd be flying. I mean, yes, because they were, quote, the home team, they would have been flying from home because of Game 7. But we've seen teams in, quote, normal years where they're on the